A warm welcome to everybody that is tuning in online. This is the first meeting of the new cabinet, and I'd just like to say a few words, if I may, use Chair's prerogative around this new administration. And this cabinet is built on knowledge, skills, and experience, and we all come to you with a bold vision for the future of the borough and all of our residents. Our number one priority is making sure that the work of this council is embedded in our communities and that the decisions made are informed with consideration for our communities. Only by ensuring people are at the heart of what we can do can we be sure we'll be delivering on the three main strands of this administration's ambitions. And that is nurturing a sense of pride in Merton, building a sustainable future for Merton, and making Merton the borough of sport. Now, some of these priorities will already start to be delivered on this evening by the cabinet decisions that we hope to take later on in the meeting. And we look forward to continuing to deliver on them over the next 4 years. Now, just moving to the formal agenda, item 1 is apologies. And as this is a newly assembled cabinet, I'm sure you all appreciate that a number of members had pre-existing commitments for this meeting date, which was set during the previous administration. I have apologies from Councillor Billy Christie, who's on his honeymoon, and I'd like to extend congratulations from everybody here to Councillor Christie and his new wife. I also have apologies from Councillor Stephen Allen Brittis, who is unable to attend, and attending remotely Councillor Andrew Judge and Councillor Peter McCabe. Voting will be recorded from the cabinet members attending here in the council chamber. Are there any other apologies? No. Okay, so moving on to item 2, and this is declarations of interests. Members should state whether they have a personal or prejudicial interest and on what basis they have this interest. So are there any declarations of interest? No, thank you. Okay, moving on to item 3, it's the minutes. Can we approve the minutes of the following meetings? We've got the 17th of March 2022, the special meeting, the 17th of March 2022 special meeting exempt minutes, and the 21st of March 2022, and the 21st of March the exempt minutes. Are they approved? Approved. Thank you very much. So a change in the order of the items at the rest of the agenda. I'll be taking item 7 first, which is the outturn report, and then we'll move to the other business. And now, in the absence of Councillor Christie, I'll be introducing this item and then asking our lead officer to come in. And I just really want to say around the outturn report that as a result of the difficult but successful negotiations with the DFE to get funding for the dedicated schools grant deficit, we now have a favourable variance in our finances. And it should be noted that without the safety valve funding, we would have had an adverse variance of about 0.8 million in total. It's also important to note that the positive position masks some of the significant overspends in the departments with the loss of income due to COVID in the environment and regen and corporate services, as well as service pressures in children's schools and families. The service pressures and loss of income due to COVID are likely to continue into the current financial year. However, due to the current favourable financial position, we have put additional funding towards 3 areas that I'd like to draw particular attention to. Firstly, the Climate Change Reserve has received an uplift of £2 million to support our efforts in achieving net zero carbon as a council by 2030. We've also set up a cost of living fund to support our residents with soaring costs and financial pressures. And lastly, we're also serious in our intent on rebuilding pride within our great borough. And we've created a civic pride fund. And that's really the main areas that I would like to cover on the report. And I'll just hand over to the lead officer to see if there's anything to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. I suppose just to highlight within the report, there is an update on our reserves. So which shows either reserves which are being used or there have been some additional top-ups, for example, on the just trying to find it, and the local land charges where we have to set aside monies that have come in to then see if they do need to be reclaimed for future use. We've also clearly had to top up our offset reserve for the dedicated schools grant because we still need to fund the shortfall, put forward our share. And also there is an update on some of the COVID activity and the funding that we've had and the future use for it. So, for example, we have carried forward our contained outbreak management fund of just over 2 million to help fund expenditure in this financial year. But that information is set out. We've also got some capital expenditure, and whilst the estimate of spend was below what we had thought we would achieve, the funding assumptions behind it were practically spot on. And there's been significant expenditure on, again, secondary school expansions, our SEN expansion, highways, footways, and of course some of the works around Bishopsford Bridge. Happy to leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any Cabinet members wishing to speak? Councillor Irons.
Thank you, Chair. Just to highlight how pleased I am to see us getting some more funding towards fighting the climate emergency. It's a massive challenge, and we know the costs are huge. So showing this commitment to that with this money is really welcome, and will help kind of deliver on our action plan quicker and more smartly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Irons. Councillor Stringer.
Thank you. And Chad, similarly, we think it's brilliant that we've been able to set aside some money for civic pride. And as you said, it's not just civic pride that's central to what we're trying to do here, but also making sure that we're listening to and engaging with residents. So I really look forward to working with you and Cabinet members and the residents to make sure that we're investing that money in things that we think really, really matter to local people.
Thank you, Councillor Stringer. Councillor Kenny.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say I'm absolutely delighted about the fund, the cost of living fund, to help the vulnerable people of Merton. I think that is one absolute wonderful thing to do, and thank you very much for that asset being added.
Thank you, Councillor Kenny. Councillor Cooper-Marbia.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. And as a fellow former Cabinet member for schools, I would also like to extend my thanks to Councillor Stringer and her team for the work they all did to secure the DSG grants from the Department of Education. And could the officers for schools kind of outline the contribution the council has similarly made? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper-Marbia. And I'll ask the lead officer to come in.
Yeah, I'm representing Jane McSherry tonight. Yeah, thank you very much for that. Clearly, it was a lot of work to get that money, and it's key. There's a long road ahead in the general DSG issue, but yeah, thanks very much for that. Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else who indicate wishing to speak? No. Okay. Do we agree with recommendations A to D on the outturn report? Thank you very much. So we'll move on to item 4, which is the extension of contracts for temporary accommodation services. And I'll ask the lead Cabinet member, Councillor Andrew Judge, to introduce his item.
Well, thank you, Leader. This is to approve an extension in a new lease for 5 years after the expiry of the current lease on Hall Place. The current lease expires on the 4th of 11/26. And this relates to our duty to house the homeless, those in priority need, those who have settled immigration status, and to whom we owe a interim duty. The accommodation that we provide must be suitable, and so far as possible, it must be in our area. And the providers of Hall Place are called Rooms and Studios, and they have an excellent record. They've refurbished their accommodation. They're providing 81 self-contained homes for homeless people. And there is a lease mechanism which requires a negotiation on a rent increase at about this time. Now, officers have negotiated with Rooms and Studios to reduce the rent we would otherwise be paying, the increase in rent we would otherwise be paying, which would be, I think, £211,000 per annum, by 50%, provided we extend our lease from 2026 to 2031. And certainly the view of officers and my view is that this is a good deal for the borough, and it is a good deal for our homeless people. We want Hall Place to continue to be used by homeless people in Merton. And at the moment, too many are having to be housed outside of the borough in any event. So the risk that we will be buying accommodation for homeless people who will not require it is in fact a very low risk. It's a risk worth taking. So I congratulate the officers on the fine deal they've negotiated and the providers on the excellent service they are providing. And I recommend we go ahead with this increase, this lease extension from 2026. Thank you, Luca.
Thank you, Councillor Judge. And I'll invite the lead officer if they'd like to add.
The only thing I would like to add is Councillor Judge has already mentioned the high quality standard of Hall Place. It's actually been given the highest rating under a London-wide setting the standard inspection regime for accommodation. It provides accommodation for people that are homeless, but it tends to be parents or caregivers with small children. And it is something to be proud of, the level of standard of accommodation that they provide in the borough. That was all I had.
Thank you. And now I invite Cabinet members for their contributions. Councillor Fraser.
Thanks. Sorry about that. Thank you for asking me to speak, but I really wanted to add something because this is my portfolio, Children's Services. And as we know, it's particularly important that children have secure places to live so that they can live and thrive and do their work and feel secure, and that their parents won't have to worry so much about anything. However, what I really would like to ask the Cabinet member, can you please tell me how this contract helps children live in more secure accommodation?
Well, this is a tried and tested accommodation that the borough approves, and we've seen the high quality of accommodation that is granted. And the alternative could be a temporary ad hoc accommodation, particularly bed and breakfast accommodation outside the borough. So what we have here is something where we are certain of the quality and where, as a borough, we can determine the longevity and the stability that children and families have. So it is better, far better than the alternative. It's something we should be proud of, that we've able to have this negotiation and have this accommodation in the past. And as we've heard, it's outstanding in London.
Thank you, Councillor Judge. Is there any other Cabinet member wishing to make a contribution? No, okay. Do we agree with recommendation A of the report? Okay, thank you. So moving to item 5, which is the contract award of the school cleaning and ancillary services. I'd like to ask Cabinet member Councillor Kenny to introduce this item.
Thank you. With this item, the school cleaning contract, it's great to have a local company doing it, which is much more easy to keep in contact with. And I'd like to add that Merton is a direct employer of the London Living Wage, and schools are employing the staff or having to pay for their contract. So we're hoping that we can work closely with them and officers to find a way forward to reach a point where they can pay the London Living Wage as well. But they've got to manage within their budgets, and we can't force them to do it, but we're hoping to work with them to make it a mutually agreed item.
Thank you, Councillor Kenny. Would the lead officer have anything to add?
I mean, just to reiterate Councillor Kenny's point that this is a delegated matter for schools. We run on a contract on behalf of the schools for their benefit. It's self-funding. But yeah, we're pleased with the outcome, which is obviously an exempt item, but we are pleased with the outcome that it has in this time of inflation. Contained costs by the winning contractor is looking at efficiencies and has delivered those. Whether schools choose to pay the London Living Wage is then a question, but we've set it up so that can be done quite easily by making those arrangements possible.
Thank you very much. Are there any Cabinet members wishing to make a contribution? Yep, Councillor Stringer.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Kenny. So not to labour the point, so for clarity, we as a borough pay London Living Wage on our staff, and what it's the case that we're going to try and encourage schools to pay that, completely recognising the fundamental importance of London Living Wage for households on such jobs, but also the incredible tightness of school budgets at the moment.
Councillor Kenny.
I mainly covered that at the beginning, but as Tom Proctor said, we can encourage schools, we can work with schools to do it. We can set the example as an authority, but it is very difficult with schools managing on their tight budgets, and especially with circumstances as there is throughout the country with the birth rate dropping and there might be less of an income coming in. It is more difficult for schools. But I think that it is something they would love to support as long as they can financially support it.
Thank you, Councillor Kenny. Are there any other contributions? No. Okay, can we agree recommendations A and B of the report? Thank you very much. So item 6, supported living services for adults with a learning disability. Can I ask Councillor Peter McCabe to introduce the item, please?
Sorry, leader, I was having trouble unmuting then. I'm happy to introduce this item. I think the report is very clear and speaks for itself, but there are a few things that I'd like to draw attention to members of the Cabinet to. And the purpose of this report is to seek approval to award a contract for the provision of supported living care and support services for adults with learning disabilities across 3 supported living schemes at Metham Road, Concord House and Clifford Avenue. And the report details the commissioning and procurement process undertaken. And I have had the opportunity to speak to the officer that was principally responsible for that, Keith Burns, and he's answered all my questions and satisfied me that this has been done in a very thorough, comprehensive manner. I think I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that there are 18 flats across the 3 schemes, and that the objectives of the service are to maximise independence, to establish a well-managed, sustainable and capable supported living scheme across the 3 schemes, to enable customers to exercise choice, to avoid unnecessary restricting of customers' independence, be sensitive, appropriate and designed so that it is inclusive meet and respond to changes in local needs and national legislation, and to work with customers to meet their desired outcomes and work collaboratively to develop the best practice within the scheme. I've mentioned that I think the procurement has been a very thorough process, and we have arrived at a recommendation which I fully support. It's also worth mentioning that all bidders were required to submit bids and were made aware that the successful bidder would be required to pay their carers at least a London living wage rate. So I commend the recommendations to my colleagues in the Cabinet, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Councillor McCabe, and I'd like to invite the lead officer for any contributions.
The only thing I would add is Councillor McCabe's spoken about the importance of independence for the service users. The current contract is a block contract, so every one of the residents receives exactly the same care package. The new care package is moving towards a core hours, so the 24 hours are provided, but that people have individual care packages, giving them much more choice and control over their lives and over the care that they receive. That was all I had to add.
Thank you. Are there any Cabinet members wishing to speak? Councillor Kenny.
I'd just like to ask Mr. Morgan, what are the other social values and benefits of this contract?
Well, of course, the first one is that the provider will pay the London living wage or above, but there are a number of other social values within the contract. The first one is that the provider must provide 5 placements for people who have been identified as NEET, so that's not in employment, education or training. They must provide 5 placements for people who've been in long-term employment, helping both of those groups get into employment within the social care sector. That they've got to provide 48 hours staff hours for school colleges visits within LBM schools and colleges, delivering such activities as career talks. They've got to provide 208 weeks of training opportunities for their own staff. And they've got to provide environmental programs within groups and schools as well. And the final one is they've got to provide 48 hours of expertise to undertake a circular economy campaign. And that could include things like recycling or turning waste into resources and providing those kind of talks around the local community. Those are the main ones. In fact, those are them all.
Thank you very much. Are there any other Cabinet members wishing to speak? Councillor Stringer? Yeah.
Just very briefly say how welcome it is to hear both that huge range of social value that the provider is bringing to Merton, and we look forward to seeing more contracts that we are able to let at London living wage, even when they are one step removed as well. So thank you everyone for their work on that.
Thank you, Councillor Stringer. Are there any other contributions? No. Okay. Can we agree recommendations A and B? Agreed. Thank you very much. Okay, we now move to the exempt items on the agenda, and we need to resolve that the public are excluded from the meeting during consideration of the reports on the grounds that they are exempt from disclosure for the reasons stated in the reports.